The air in the birthing house hung thick as communion wine, sweet with magnolia blossoms and copper-sharp with blood. Delphine's hands moved through the darkness with the practiced certainty of a woman who had guided too many souls into this world, and perhaps, some whispered, guided others out of it just as swiftly. The infant lay on the washing table, pink and writhing, its cries threading through the oppressive August heat like needles through cloth. Outside, the cicadas screamed their endless hymn to the North Carolina night, a sound that had long ago ceased to be music and had become instead a kind of madness, a pressure against the skull that never relented. Mrs. Temperance Vexley lay exhausted in the birthing bed behind the muslin curtain, her breathing shallow, her pale hand draped across her swollen belly as though she might find another child still hiding there. She had asked for laudanum. Delphine had given it to her, enough to pull her into the dark waters of sleep, enough to keep her there while the necessary work was done. The baby was a girl. The fifth daughter. Master Josiah would be displeased. Delphine dipped the cloth into the basin of water, now pink with afterbirth and fluid, and began to clean the infant with movements that appeared tender to any who might have been watching. But there were no watchers. There never were, not at this hour, not when the moon hung low and swollen over the longleaf pines like a cataract blind eye. Her own hands were steady. They had not always been so. Once, years ago, they had trembled when they held a new life. Once, she had sung lullabies in her mother's Gullah tongue, had pressed her lips to downy foreheads and breathed blessings over squalling mouths. Once, she had believed in the sanctity of the birthing house, in the holiness of the passage from darkness into light. That was before they took her son. Before she understood that some lights were merely different kinds of darkness. The infant's cries grew more insistent, little fists pumping the air as though fighting off invisible attackers. Delphine reached for the small leather pouch that hung beneath her shift, hidden against her heart. Her fingers found the cool glass vial inside, and beside it, the smaller pouch of graveyard ash that old Ebony had given her in the swamp, back when Delphine's grief had been fresh and howling. "Hush now," Delphine whispered, her voice carrying the liquid consonants of the Gullah she had learned at her grandmother's knee. "Hush, little one. You don't know what world you were born in." She uncorked the vial, just a drop, no more, and let it fall onto her fingertip. The tincture was made from oleander roots and something else, something Ebony had never named. It would not kill, not by itself. That was not how the crossing worked. Death left evidence. Death brought questions. No, this was gentler. Kinder, even. Or so Delphine told herself in the moments when doubt crept through the cracks in her conviction like water through a failing dam. She touched the infant's lips with the tincture, watched the small mouth purse and then relaxed. The cries softened, became confused mewling, then faded to silence. The baby's eyes, still that deep, unfocused blue of all newborns, stared up at nothing, at everything. "Good," Delphine breathed. "That's good, child." She opened the pouch of ash. It was mixed with graveyard dirt from the 17 small graves beneath the weeping willow, mixed with brick dust from the old church ruins, mixed with her own blood drawn under the dark moon. The substance was grey and fine as flour, and it smelled of earth and endings. Delphine dipped her thumb into the ash, then pressed it to the infant's left foot, just below the smallest toe. She drew the symbol carefully, 3 curved lines forming a spiral that wound inward, then a single slash breaking through. A gate. A doorway. A passage back. The baby did not cry. Its small chest rose and fell, but more slowly now. More peacefully. "Fly back, little one," Delphine whispered in Gullah, the words her grandmother had taught her, the words that spoke of the old country, of Guinea, of souls that could not be chained. "Fly back across the water. Don't stay here. Don't grow in these chains. Your mama won't know the mercy I give you, but your spirit will. Fly back, for they can name you. For they can own you." She pressed her palm against the infant's chest, feeling the hummingbird flutter of its heart beneath skin so thin she could see the blue tracery of veins beneath. Her other hand moved to the soft spot at the crown of the baby's head, that vulnerable place where the skull had not yet closed, where the soul sat closest to the surface. This was where skill met something darker. This was where mercy became murder, or murder became mercy, depending on who told the story. Delphine applied pressure, gentle, so gentle, to both points at once. The rhythm had to be precise. Too much, and there would be marks, bruises, questions. Too little, and the child would wake, would cry, would live to see the brutality of the world Delphine was trying to spare her from. She counted in her head. 15 seconds. 20. The baby's breathing stuttered. Delphine's own breath caught in her throat, a sound like a sob or a prayer. 30 seconds. The infant's eyes began to drift closed. "Forgive me," Delphine whispered, though she did not know if she was speaking to the child, to God, or to the woman she had been before the breaking. "Forgive me, but I cannot let another one live like I have lived. I cannot." 40 seconds. The baby's lips had gone pale, the pink flush fading like sunset bleeding out of clouds. And then. Footsteps. Heavy boots on the wooden porch outside, moving with the purposeful stride of a man who owned everything he walked upon. Delphine's hands jerked away from the infant as though the child had become fired. She spun toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs like something trapped and desperate. The baby gasped, a thin, reedy sound, and began to cry again. Weak, confused, but alive. Alive. Delphine's mind fractured into 1,000 calculations at once. Had she been seen? How long had the footsteps been approaching? Would there be marks on the child's skin? Could she hide the ash, the vial, the evidence of her terrible mercy? The door swung open. Silas Blackwood stood silhouetted against the moonlight, his face in shadow but his intent clear in the tension of his shoulders. The overseer was a tall man, lean as a whip and twice as cruel, with eyes the color of dirty ice and hands that had beaten more flesh than they had ever caressed. "What's taking so long?" His voice was gravel scraped across tin. "Mrs. Vexley's been delivered for nearly an hour now." Delphine forced her hands to stillness, forced her face into the mask of servile blankness that had kept her alive for 33 years in this place. She turned back to the infant, using her body to block his view of the ash-marked foot, and resumed washing the child with movements that appeared entirely ordinary. "The baby struggling to breathe properly, Master Silas," she said, keeping her voice low and respectful, emptied of everything she truly felt. "I was clearing her lungs. She is coming around now." It was not entirely a lie. The infant was breathing, was crying, was present in the world in a way she had not been moments before. Whatever Delphine had intended, whatever darkness she had invited in, had been interrupted. This time. Silas stepped further into the birthing house, and the smell of him invaded the space, tobacco and sweat and something sour, like meat beginning to spoil. He moved to the muslin curtain and peered at Mrs. Vexley's sleeping form, then grunted his approval. "Another girl," he said, his tone making clear that this was both a statement and judgment. "Master Josiah won't be pleased." "No, sir," Delphine agreed, because agreeing was survival. Silas watched her for a long moment, his eyes traveling over her face, her hands, the basin of bloody water. Delphine kept washing the baby, kept her movements smooth and professional, kept her breathing even despite the terror that coiled in her belly like a snake preparing to strike. "You've been alone all night?" Silas asked. "Yes, sir. Just me and Mrs. Vexley and the good Lord's mercy." Another grunt. Silas turned toward the door, then paused. When he looked back at her, there was something in his expression that made Delphine's blood run cold, not quite suspicion, not quite accusation, but close. So terribly close. 17 babies have died in this house since you became the nurse here, Delphine, he said quietly. Have you ever thought about that? 17, in just 3 years. That's a powerful lot of bad luck for one birthing house. Delphine met his eyes, though it cost her. Death doesn't need any invitation on a plantation, Master Silas. It just come when it come. Maybe. He tilted his head, studying her like a man studying a horse he suspected might be lame. Or maybe death's got help. Maybe it's got hands. The cicadas screamed. The magnolia blossoms poured their cloying sweetness through the open windows. The infant cried, and cried, and cried. I only got healing hands, sir, Delphine said. Healing hands and prayers. Silas stared at her for 3 heartbeats longer, then turned and walked out into the night, his boots heavy on the steps, fading into the darkness beyond the reach of the single candle burning on the washing table. Delphine stood frozen, the baby cradled in her arms, ash still visible on the tiny foot if anyone cared to look closely enough. Her hands began to shake, finally, violently, and she sank onto the stool beside the washing table before her legs could give out entirely. The infant had survived. This one would live, would grow, would become whatever awful thing this world demanded of white girls born into the rot of plantation wealth. And Delphine knew, with the certainty of bone-deep exhaustion, that she could not stop. The mercy she offered was the only mercy she had left to give, the only power she possessed in a world designed to strip her of everything, dignity, hope, even her own child's face, which she could no longer remember clearly. 17 graves under the willow tree. 17 souls were sent back across the water before chains could bind them. And this one, this 18th child, had escaped her. Had been saved. Or damned. Delphine lifted the infant to her shoulder and began to hum, a low tuneless sound that was neither lullaby nor dirge but something suspended between the two. Outside, the night pressed close, humid and watchful. The smell of magnolias mixed with copper, with ash, with the salt of her own sweat. And somewhere in the distance, perhaps real, perhaps imagined, she heard the first whisper of voices rising in the slave quarters, urgent and afraid, speaking of omens and darkness and the mad nurse in the birthing house who held the power of life and death in her terrible, gentle hands. The Vexley revolt would begin that night. But none of them knew it yet. Not even Delphine herself. If you're drawn into Delphine's dark world and want to see where this horror leads, subscribe and comment below. Tell me, is what Delphine does mercy or murder? The line between the two is thinner than you think. Dawn came to the Vexley plantation like a judgment, all blood-red and merciless, burning away the merciful darkness and exposing everything to the brutal clarity of day. Delphine had not slept. She never did after nights in the birthing house, after the work was done, or in last night's case, interrupted. She moved through the pre-dawn shadows like something that had forgotten how to be entirely human, her feet finding the familiar path from the birthing house to the kitchen without conscious thought. The red clay of North Carolina clung to her bare feet, staining them the color of old rust, of dried blood. Dew soaked the hem of her worn shift, cold against her ankles despite the promise of heat already building in the air. The kitchen house stood separate from the main residence, a precaution against fire, though Delphine sometimes thought it was more than that. The white folks didn't want to be too close to the people who prepared their food, didn't want to acknowledge the hands that fed them were the same hands they owned, could sell, could break. Inside, the fire was already blazing. Hester stood at the hearth, her broad back to the door, stirring something in the great iron pot that had cooked 1,000 meals for the Vexley family and their guests. She was perhaps 60 years old, though her face carried the weight of twice that many years, etched deep with lines that spoke of sorrows too numerous to count. "You look like Death's own sister this morning," Hester said without turning around. Delphine didn't answer. She moved to the water barrel, dipped the gourd ladle, and drank deeply. The water was tepid, tasting of wood and iron, but it washed the ash taste from her mouth, the residue of ritual and regret. "Mrs. Vexley's baby live?" Hester asked. "She lives." The sound Hester made carried worlds of meaning, none of them entirely safe to speak aloud. "That's 18 births you attended this year. 18 babies come through your hands." Delphine set down the ladle with careful precision. "Are you keeping count?" "Everybody keeping count, child." Hester finally turned, her dark eyes finding Delphine's with an intensity that made the younger woman want to look away. "They have been keeping count for 3 years now. 17 dead babies. 17 little souls that never drew more than a few breaths before the Lord called them home. Babies die," Delphine said flatly. "They always have. They always will. Not like this." Hester's voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. "Not this many. Not with you attending every single one." The words hung between them like smoke, acrid and impossible to ignore. Delphine felt something crack open inside her chest, not guilt, she had moved beyond guilt months ago, but something closer to recognition. The recognition that her secret was becoming visible, that the careful mask she wore was beginning to slip. "You're accusing me of something, Hester." "I ain't accusing. I'm observing." Hester turned back to her pot, stirring with slow, deliberate movements. "I'm observing that grief does strange things to a woman. Makes her see mercy where there ain't nothing but harm. Makes her think she got the right to play God when God himself seems to have turned his face away from this place." Delphine's hands clenched into fists. "Don't speak on what you don't understand." "Oh, I understand plenty." Hester's voice hardened. I understand you lost your boy. I understand Master Josiah sold him away before you could even count his fingers and toes. I understand that kind of pain could break a woman's mind clean in two. What I don't understand is how you think killing other women's babies gonna bring yours back. The word struck like a physical blow. Delphine staggered back a step, her vision blurring with sudden tears that she refused to let fall. I don't kill them, she whispered. I set them free. You think there's a difference? Before Delphine could answer, the kitchen door swung open. Ezekiel ducked through the low doorway, his tall frame unfolding like a knife being opened. He was perhaps 25, born on the Vexley plantation, and carried himself with a barely contained fury that made the overseers watch him constantly. His eyes went immediately to Delphine, and something passed across his face, concern, or perhaps calculation. Master Josiah asking for you, he said to Delphine. He is in the main house library. Want you there in 10 minutes. Delphine's stomach dropped. He say why? Just that he want to see the woman who delivered his latest disappointment. Ezekiel's mouth twisted with bitter humor. Another girl child. He is expecting a son. He got 5 daughters and a wife, Hester muttered. Seems like God is trying to tell him something about his seed. Ezekiel moved closer to Delphine, his voice dropping. Silas has been asking questions about you. About the babies that died. You need to be careful. I'm always careful. Not careful enough. His eyes held hers. There's talk. In the quarters, in the fields. People are scared of you, Delphine. They call you the angel of death behind your back. Say you got powers from the root woman in the swamp. Say you mark babies for dying. Let them talk, Delphine said, but her voice shook. Talk leads to action, Ezekiel said quietly. And action on a plantation leads to blood. Either yours or somebody else's. You need to stop whatever it is you're doing in that birthing house. Delphine pushed past him, out into the brightening morning. The sun had cleared the longleaf pines now, turning the sky from red to hard, pitiless blue. She could feel both Hester and Ezekiel watching her go, could feel the weight of their concern and their suspicion pressing against her back like hands. She did not go immediately to the main house. Instead, her feet carried her toward the eastern edge of the property, where the land sloped down toward the marshy ground that fed into the swamp. There, standing alone in a small clearing, was the weeping willow tree. And beneath it, 17 graves. They were small, most of them. Some marked with crude wooden crosses, others with nothing but stones arranged in circles. 7 of the graves held enslaved children, babies born in the quarters to women who had wept and screamed and cursed Delphine's name. The other 10 held white children, infants of the Vexley family and neighboring plantation owners who had called upon Delphine's skill as a midwife. Death did not discriminate in Delphine's hands. Mercy, as she understood it, belonged to all children equally. She knelt in the damp grass, ignoring the way the moisture seeped through her shift. Her fingers traced the outline of the nearest grave, a baby boy born 6 months ago to one of the field workers, a woman named Patience who had not spoken a word since her child died. The infant had been perfect, healthy, squalling with life. Until Delphine held him. Until she whispered the words Abony had taught her. Until she marked his foot with ash and pressed her hands to the places where life could be gently, carefully, extinguished. Forgive me, Delphine whispered to the graves, to the souls she had sent flying back across the water. Forgive me for my mercy. Forgive me for my madness. Forgive me for not knowing the difference anymore. She remembered each one. Their faces, their cries, the exact moment when life left their eyes and something else entered, peace, perhaps, or simply the nothing that waited for everyone eventually. She remembered the first one most clearly, a girl child born to Mrs. Vexley 3 years ago, just weeks after Delphine's own son had been torn from her arms and sold to a rice plantation in South Carolina. That first death had been an accident. Or had it? Even now, Delphine couldn't be certain. She had been holding the baby, had been overwhelmed by grief so consuming she could barely breathe, and the infant had simply stopped crying. Stopped breathing. Stopped being. The doctor had called it sudden death, inexplicable. Master Josiah had wept. Mrs. Vexley had nearly gone mad with grief. And Delphine had felt, for the first time in weeks, something other than her own agony. She had felt powerful. She had felt like justice, like mercy, like the hand of God reaching down to spare one innocent soul from the horrors of the world. The second death had not been an accident. Nor the third, nor the fourth, nor any of the 13 that followed. By the time Delphine met Ebony in the swamp, drawn there by rumors of a root woman who knew the old ways, the African ways, the ways of power that the white folks feared, she had already killed 5 babies. Ebony had simply given her the language for it, the ritual structure, the belief that what she was doing was holy. "You're sending them home," Ebony had said, her ancient face cracked like dried riverbeds, her eyes milky with cataracts but somehow still seeing everything. "Sending them back across the water to Guinea, where they can't be chained, can't be broken. That's root work, child. That's mercy in a world without it." But somewhere along the way, mercy had curdled into something else. Compulsion. Obsession. A hunger that lived in Delphine's hands, in the hollow space where her heart used to be, demanding to be fed with the breath of innocence. She couldn't stop. Even when she wanted to, and there were moments, dark 3 a.m. moments, when she desperately wanted to, her hands remembered. Her hands knew the pressure points, the timing, the whispered words in Gullah that opened the door between this world and the next. Delphine. She jerked upright, spinning to find Keturah standing at the edge of the clearing. The woman was perhaps 30, heavily pregnant with her 4th child. Her previous 3 had all died before their first birthdays, fever, flux, the ordinary cruelties of plantation life. But they had lived long enough to be named, to be loved, to be mourned. "Keturah," Delphine said, rising to her feet. "You shouldn't be walking this far. Babies do any day now." "I know." Keturah's hand rested on her swollen belly, protective and afraid. "That's why I came. I need to say something to you before my time comes." Delphine waited, her heart hammering. "When my baby comes," Keturah said slowly, "I don't want you touching it. I don't want you in that birthing house. I don't care what Master Josiah says. I'd rather die trying to give birth alone than let you put your hands on my child." The words were a slap, a condemnation, a recognition of the truth that everyone was beginning to see. "You don't know what you're saying," Delphine managed. "I know exactly what I'm saying." Keturah's voice shook but held firm. "My cousin Patience's baby was healthy. Screaming loud enough to wake the dead when he came out. Then you held him, and an hour later he was cold. Mrs. Vexley's baby last month, same thing. And the overseer's wife's twins before that. 17 babies, Delphine. 17 babies that passed through your hands and straight into the ground." "Babies die," Delphine said, hearing the hollowness in her own voice. "This is a hard place. Death comes easy here." "Death comes easy where you are," Keturah corrected. "That's the difference. That's what everyone's starting to see." She took a step back, her eyes bright with tears and terror. "Stay away from me. Stay away from my baby. Or I swear before God, I'll tell Master Josiah what you really are." She turned and hurried away as fast as her pregnant body would allow, leaving Delphine alone with the 17 graves and the weight of her terrible mercy pressing down on her shoulders like the whole sky was falling. Delphine stood there for a long time, listening to the morning dove's call from the pines, watching the Spanish moss sway in the barely there breeze. The sun climbed higher, hotter, turning the clearing into an oven. Sweat ran down her back, between her shoulder blades, pooling in the hollow of her throat. Finally, she forced herself to move. Master Josiah was waiting. And men like him did not appreciate being kept waiting by the people they owned. She walked past the kitchen house, where Hester stood in the doorway watching her with eyes that held both pity and warning. She walked past the quarters, where people stopped their morning tasks to stare at her, their faces carefully blank but their bodies tense, ready to flee or fight depending on what she did next. She walked past the smokehouse and the blacksmith's forge and the cotton gin, past all the machinery of subjugation and suffering that kept the plantation running, kept the Vexley family wealthy, and kept the whole rotten system intact. And with each step, Delphine felt the fractures spreading through her mind like cracks spreading through ice on a warming pond. She was breaking. Had been breaking for 3 years, since the moment they ripped her son from her arms. But now the breaking was accelerating, pieces of her former self falling away to reveal something underneath that she barely recognized. Something that lived in the birthing house. Something that whispered in Gullah and marked babies with ash. Something that was either divine mercy or absolute madness, and Delphine no longer possessed the clarity to tell the difference. She climbed the steps to the main house's back entrance, the one reserved for slaves. The door stood open, and inside she could hear the clatter of dishes, the murmur of voices, the ordinary sounds of the Vexley family's morning routine. Delphine paused at the threshold, looking back one last time at the weeping willow in the distance, at the 17 graves that marked her descent into whatever she had become. 18, she thought. Mrs. Vexley's baby should have been the 18th. Would have been, if Silas hadn't interrupted. The thought filled her with something that might have been regret or might have been frustration. She couldn't tell anymore. All her emotions had blurred together into a single, consuming drive, to free the children. To send them back before they could be broken by this place. To be the mercy that no one had been to her own son. Delphine. Silas Blackwood's voice barked from somewhere inside the house. Master Josiah's waiting. Get yourself in here. She stepped across the threshold, leaving the morning light behind, entering the dim interior where the white folks lived their comfortable lives built on the backs of people they refused to see as human. The door closed behind her with a sound like a coffin lid settling into place. And in the quarters, Ezekiel was already beginning to whisper to the others. Whisper about resistance. About uprising. About how long a person could endure before the breaking point was reached. The powder keg was filling. All it needed was a spark. The library smelled of leather and tobacco, of wealth accumulated through the labor of bodies that would never be allowed to rest in rooms like this. Master Josiah Vexley sat behind his mahogany desk, his face ruddy with heat and displeasure, his thick fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the polished wood. Silas Blackwood stood behind him like a sentinel, arms crossed, his pale eyes fixed on Delphine with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Another daughter, Josiah said without preamble. 5 daughters and no sons to carry my name. My wife is useless to me. Delphine kept her eyes lowered, her hands clasped before her. I'm sorry, Master Josiah. I only deliver what the Lord sends. The Lord, Josiah repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. The Lord has seen fit to give me 5 daughters while half the babies born on my plantation don't survive their first week. Do you find that peculiar, Delphine? Her heart stuttered. Sir. 17 dead infants in 3 years, Silas interjected, his voice cold as January creek water. All attended by you. Some were slave babies, some were white. But all of them passed through your hands before they died. Babies are fragile, Master Silas. They. Silence. Josiah stood, his chair scraping against the floor. He was a large man, made larger by his authority, by the absolute power he held over every living thing on his property. I want to know if you're doing something to my children. To my property. Are you administering something? Some slave magic from the swamp? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Delphine felt the walls closing in, felt the trap tightening around her throat. But she had survived 3 decades in bondage by knowing how to lie, how to make her face a mask, and how to hide the truth behind layers of servility. No, sir. I would never harm a child. I pray over every baby I deliver. I do everything the doctor taught me. Josiah studied her for a long moment, then waved his hand dismissively. Get out. But know this, if another baby dies in that birthing house, I'll have you whipped until your back is nothing but ribbons. And then I'll sell you so far south you'll never see Carolina again. Do you understand? Yes, Master Josiah. I understand. Go tend to my wife. Make sure she recovers. That's the only use I have for you now. Delphine backed out of the library, her legs trembling, her mind racing. The threat was real. Josiah was beginning to see the pattern, beginning to ask the questions that would inevitably lead to the truth. And when that truth came out, when the full scope of what she had done was revealed, there would be no mercy for her. Only rope or fire or the long walk to the auction block. She climbed the stairs to Mrs. Vexley's bedroom, each step an effort. The house felt oppressive, the August heat trapped inside the walls, making the air thick and hard to breathe. She could hear the infant crying from behind the closed door, Mrs. Vexley's 5th daughter, the one who should have been freed, who should have been sent flying back across the water. The one Delphine had failed to save. She pushed open the door. Mrs. Vexley lay in the massive 4-poster bed, her blonde hair dark with sweat, her face pale as milk. The baby was in a cradle beside the bed, red-faced and squalling. A white woman Delphine didn't recognize, perhaps a cousin or neighbor, sat in a chair by the window, fanning herself with a painted silk fan. Finally, the woman said, "The child won't stop crying. Do something." Delphine moved to the cradle, her hands reaching automatically for the infant. The moment her fingers touched the baby's skin, something electric passed between them. The child's cries intensified, became panicked, as though she recognized the hands that had tried to end her life just hours before. "She knows," Delphine thought wildly. "She knows what I am." "Pick her up," Mrs. Vexley said weakly from the bed. "Rock her. You're supposed to be good with babies." Delphine lifted the infant, cradling her against her chest. The child's screams were like knives in her ears, like accusations shrieked into the stifling air. She began to rock, began to hum, not a lullaby but something older, something in Gullah that her grandmother had taught her before the white folks had beaten the language out of her mouth. "Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya," she sang softly, the words a prayer and a plea. "Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya. Someone's crying, Lord, kumbaya." The baby's screams didn't lessen. If anything, they grew more frantic. "She doesn't like you," the woman by the window observed. "Perhaps you should find someone else to nurse her." "There is no one else," Mrs. Vexley said bitterly. "Delphine is the only midwife on the property. God knows I've lost enough children to trust anyone else." She paused, her eyes finding Delphine's with sudden sharpness. "How many of my babies have died now, Delphine?" "3. 4, ma'am," Delphine said quietly. "You had 4 babies before these daughters. All boys. All stillborn or died within hours." "4 sons," Mrs. Vexley whispered. "4 sons dead, and 5 daughters living. What kind of curse is that?" "Not a curse," Delphine thought. "Mercy. I gave your sons mercy before they could grow into monsters like their father." But she said nothing, only continued rocking the screaming infant, feeling her arms begin to ache, feeling the weight of the child become unbearable. "Take her to the nursery," Mrs. Vexley said finally. "I can't bear the noise. And send for more laudanum. Tell the doctor my milk hasn't come in. I need relief." Delphine carried the baby out of the room, down the hall to the nursery where all 5 Vexley daughters would be raised by enslaved women while their mother recovered in her opium-laced dreams. The nursery was painted a delicate pink, filled with expensive toys and clothes and all the trappings of wealth that these children would inherit simply by being born white. She placed the baby in the crib, watching as the infant's cries finally began to soften to whimpers. Delphine's hands hovered over the child, trembling. It would be so easy. So quick. One hand on the chest, one on the soft spot of the skull. Gentle pressure. Whispered words. And this daughter would join her brothers, would fly free before she could become another Temperance Vexley, another woman who owned human beings and saw nothing wrong with it. "Do it," something whispered in her mind. "Finish what you started. Save her." But she couldn't. Not now, not with Josiah's threats still ringing in her ears, not with Silas watching her every move. Delphine pulled her hands back and fled the nursery, her breath coming in gasps, her vision blurring. She stumbled down the back stairs, through the kitchen where Hester looked up in alarm, out into the blazing afternoon heat. Her feet carried her without conscious direction, away from the main house, away from the quarters, toward the edge of the property where the cultivated land gave way to wild growth. Toward the swamp. She had not been back to see Ebony in 6 months, not since the root woman had taught her the final ritual, the one that made the crossings easier. But now Delphine needed answers, needed someone to tell her if what she was doing was holy or if she had simply descended into a madness so complete she could no longer recognize herself. The path to the swamp was overgrown, marked only by broken twigs and the occasional splash of red paint on tree bark, signs left by those who still practiced the old ways, who still sought power in the places where the white folks feared to tread. The air grew thicker as she walked, heavy with moisture and the smell of decay. Cypress trees rose from black water, their roots like gnarled fingers reaching into the depths. Spanish moss hung in curtains, filtering the sunlight into a greenish gloom. Delphine splashed through shallow water, ignoring the leeches that attached to her ankles, ignoring the cottonmouth that slithered past her feet. The swamp was dangerous, but it was also a refuge. The great dismal swamp had sheltered runaways for generations, had swallowed up slave catchers and their dogs, and had become a kingdom unto itself where the laws of the plantation did not reach. Ebony's shelter stood on a hammock of solid ground, a crude structure made of cypress logs and palmetto fronds. Smoke rose from a cooking fire outside, carrying the scent of something bitter and medicinal. As Delphine approached, a voice called out from inside. "I've been waiting for you, child. Knew you'd come back when the breaking got too much to bear." Delphine ducked through the low doorway. Inside, the shelter was dark and close, filled with bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, clay pots containing powders and tinctures, bones arranged in patterns that spoke of divination and power. Ebony sat on a low stool, her ancient body bent like a question mark, her blind eyes turned toward Delphine with unsettling accuracy. "Sit," Ebony commanded. Delphine sank to the earthen floor, her legs finally giving out. "I can't stop," she whispered. "I try, but my hands remember. They know what to do. And I keep seeing my son's face, keep hearing him cry even though I never got to hear him cry. Every baby I cross over, I imagine it's him I'm saving. Him I'm sending back to freedom." "You are doing the work I taught you," Ebony said. "Sending souls home before they can be chained. That's mercy, child. Don't let anybody tell you differently." "But what if it's not?" Delphine's voice broke. "What if I'm just killing babies because I'm broken? Because my grief twisted me into something evil?" Ebony reached out with one gnarled hand, finding Delphine's face with practiced ease. Her fingers traced the tears on Delphine's cheeks. "You think evil cries? Evil doesn't feel anything. What you doing because you feel too much. Because you can't bear to see more children sold away, beaten down, used up like you've been used up." "They're going to catch me," Delphine said. "The overseer suspects. The master's asking questions. And the people in the quarters, they're afraid of me. They call me death." "Then maybe it's time," Ebony said softly. "Time for what?" "Time for the fire to come. Time for the blood to flow. Time for all this evil to burn down so something new can grow from the ashes." Ebony's blind eyes seemed to see through Delphine, through the walls, through time itself. "You ain't just a nurse, child. You spark. And this plantation is dry kindling just waiting to catch." Delphine shook her head. "I don't want that. I just want—" "What?" "Peace." Ebony laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "Ain't no peace for us in this world, child. Only struggle. Only resistance. Only the choice between being broken slow or going down fighting." "I'm tired," Delphine whispered. "I'm so tired of fighting. Tired of carrying this weight." "Then put it down." Ebony stood, moving to one of her shelves. She returned with a small clay pot, pressing it into Delphine's hands. "This here is freedom. One drink, and all your pain stops. All your questions go silent. You cross over yourself, fly back to Guinea with all the babies you sent ahead." Delphine stared at the pot, feeling its weight, understanding what it contained. Poison. Release. An end to the impossible burden of living in a world designed to destroy her. "Or," Ebony continued, "you can go back. You can keep doing the work. Keep being the spark. And when they finally catch you, and they will catch you, child, you let that spark become a wildfire." "I don't understand." "You will." Ebony's hand covered Delphine's, pressing down on the clay pot. "When the time comes, you'll understand. The ancestors will show you the way. They've been waiting for someone like you. Someone broken enough to see clearly. Someone with nothing left to lose." Delphine stood on shaking legs, still holding the pot. "What if I use it? What if I drink it tonight and just stop? Then 17 babies will be waiting for you on the other side. And all the ones who live will grow up in chains, and their children's children will grow up in chains, until somebody else gets broken enough to become the spark." Ebony's voice was gentle but implacable. "The choice is yours, child. It has always been yours. But choose knowing what each choice means." Delphine walked out of the shelter, the pot clutched to her chest, Ebony's words echoing in her mind. The swamp around her seemed to pulse with life, frogs croaking, insects buzzing, birds calling. All of nature crying out in its own language, indifferent to human suffering, indifferent to the choice one broken woman was being forced to make. She stood at the edge of the black water, looking at her reflection. The woman looking back was a stranger, eyes hollow, face gaunt, expression somewhere between grief and madness. This was what the plantation had made her. This was what 3 decades of bondage, of loss, of watching children born into suffering had created. A monster. Or a mercy. Or perhaps there was no difference. Delphine tucked the clay pot into her shift and began the long walk back to the plantation, back to the birthing house, back to the work that would not stop until she did. Behind her, in the swamp, Ebony smiled her blind smile and whispered to the ancestors, "She is ready. The spark is ready. Let the fire come." The line between mercy and murder grows thinner with each chapter. What would you do in Delphine's place? Subscribe and comment below. I want to hear your thoughts on whether Delphine is a villain or victim, or perhaps both at once. 3 days passed like a fever dream, heavy with humidity and unspoken tension. Delphine moved through her duties in a haze, the clay pot of poison hidden beneath the loose floorboard in her cabin, its presence both comfort and temptation. Mrs. Vexley's 5th daughter thrived despite Delphine's earlier attempt, nursing hungrily, crying lustily, living with an almost defiant vitality. And then, on the 4th night, Keturah's time came. Delphine was summoned just after midnight by Ezekiel, who appeared at her cabin door with urgency written across his face. "Keturah's baby is coming," he said. "She asks for Hester, but Master Josiah says you attend all births. No exceptions. She doesn't want me there." "I know." Ezekiel's eyes held hers. "She's been screaming it for the past hour. But the master don't care what she wants. You know that." Delphine rose, her body moving automatically through the familiar preparations. She gathered her supplies, clean clothes, water, the leather pouch she always wore. Inside the pouch, alongside her instruments, the vial of tincture and the ash waited. Her hands trembled as she touched them. "I won't," she told herself. "Not tonight. Not again." But even as she thought it, she felt the hunger rising in her chest, that terrible compulsion that had become stronger than her will. The birthing house was lit by a single lantern when she arrived. Keturah lay on the bed, her body arched with pain, her face sheened with sweat. Hester stood beside her, holding her hand, and when Delphine entered, both women's eyes filled with terror. "No," Keturah gasped. "Get her out. Get her away from me." "I can't," Delphine said quietly. "Master's orders. I have to attend the birth. You stay away from my baby." Keturah's voice rose to a shriek. "Don't you touch my baby. Don't you put your devil hands anywhere near my child." "Hush now," Hester said, though her own face was pale. "Baby's coming whether we want it to or not. We got to get through this." The labor was hard. Hours passed in a blur of pain and screaming, of blood and the animal sounds that all women make when life is being torn from their bodies. Delphine worked with mechanical efficiency, her hands knowing what to do even as her mind drifted elsewhere. She thought of her son, wondered if his mother, whoever was raising him now on that South Carolina rice plantation, had gentle hands. Wondered if he remembered her at all, or if he had been too young when they took him. I wondered if death would have been kinder. Just before dawn, the baby came. A boy, perfect and squalling, his cries filling the birthing house with sound that was both beautiful and unbearable. Keturah wept with relief, reaching for him, but Delphine held the infant away, beginning the necessary cleaning, the cutting of the cord. "Give him to me," Keturah demanded. "Give me my son. I need to clean him first," Delphine heard herself say, though her voice sounded distant, as if someone else was speaking through her mouth. Her hands moved without her permission. The vial appeared in her fingers. Just one drop on the baby's lips, she had done it so many times, the motion was reflexive. The infant's cries softened, becoming confused. "What are you doing?" Hester's voice cut through the fog in Delphine's mind. "Delphine, what did you just give that baby?" "Nothing. Just water to clear his mouth." But Hester was moving around the bed now, her eyes on Delphine's hands. "That ain't water. What's in that vial?" Delphine's fingers found the pouch of ash. She dipped her thumb into it, the gray powder clinging to her skin. The baby was quieting now, his small body growing slack in her arms. She pressed her ash-marked thumb to his left foot, drawing the symbol, 3 curved lines spiraling inward, 1 slash breaking through. The gate. The doorway. The passage home. Dear God, Hester breathed. You marked him. You mark him for death. I'm setting him free, Delphine whispered, and placed her hands in position, one on the infant's chest, one on the soft fontanelle. I'm sending him back before they can chain him. Before they can sell him away from his mother like they sold my boy from me. No. Ketura's scream was inhuman, an animal. She tried to rise from the bed, but her body was too weak, too spent from hours of labor. Stop her. Somebody stop her. Delphine began to press, and began to count. 5 seconds. 10. The door exploded inward. Silas Blackwood stood in the doorway, his face illuminated by the lantern he carried, his expression a mask of triumph and rage. Behind him stood 2 other overseers, both armed with rifles. I knew it, Silas said quietly. I goddamn knew it. Delphine froze, her hands still on the baby, the infant's breathing shallow but present. Time seemed to stop, to crystallize around this single moment, the moment when everything she had hidden for 3 years was laid bare. Step away from the child, Silas commanded. Delphine didn't move. Couldn't move. Her hands remained frozen in position, torn between finishing what she had started and the terrible knowledge that she had finally been caught. I said step away. Silas crossed the room in 3 strides, his hand cracking across Delphine's face with enough force to send her sprawling. The baby tumbled from her arms, and Hester lunged forward to catch him, pressing the infant to Ketura's chest. Breathe, baby, Keturah sobbed, her hands frantically patting the child's back. Please breathe. Please don't leave me. The infant gasped, once, twice, and then let out a thin wail. Alive. Still alive. Silas grabbed Delphine by her hair, hauling her to her feet. What did you give him? What poison? No poison, Delphine said, tasting blood from her split lip. Just mercy. Just freedom. Freedom. Silas's laugh was ugly. You've been killing babies and calling it freedom? He dragged her toward the washing table, where her supplies lay scattered. His free hand swept across them, sending instruments clattering to the floor, until he found what he was looking for, the vial, still containing a few drops of tincture. He held it up to the light. What is this? When Delphine didn't answer, he backhanded her again. I asked you a question, slave. Oleander, she whispered. And other things. From the root woman in the swamp. Oleander. Silas looked at the vial, then at the baby now crying in Ketura's arms. How many? How many babies have you poisoned? I didn't poison them. I freed them. How many? 17, Delphine said, and felt something break open inside her, not regret, not shame, but a terrible relief at finally speaking the truth aloud. 17 souls I sent flying back across the water. 17 children I saved from this place. The words fell into the birthing house like stones into still water. Ketura's weeping intensified. Hester made a sound like a wounded animal. Even Silas seemed momentarily stunned into silence. Then he smiled, a cold, cruel expression that promised suffering. You're going to burn for this. Master Josiah's going to have you burned alive, and I'm going to light the pyre myself. He dragged her out of the birthing house, into the pre-dawn darkness where others were beginning to gather. Word had spread quickly, the way it always did on a plantation, moving through the quarters like wildfire. Enslaved people stood in small groups, their faces showing every emotion from horror to understanding to something that looked almost like hope. Master Josiah emerged from the main house, pulling on his coat, his face purple with rage. Is it true? Has she confessed? 17 babies, Silas announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. 17 murders. This woman is a monster, and she'll hang for what she's done. Not hang, Josiah said. Hanging's too quick, too merciful. She'll burn. At dawn. Let everyone see what happens to slaves who forget their place. Delphine stood in Silas's grip, blood running down her chin, her body aching from the blows. But she felt strangely calm, as if she had finally stepped outside herself and could see everything with terrible clarity. Around her, in the gathering crowd, she saw the faces of mothers whose babies had died in her care. Saw the rage, the grief, the betrayal. But she also saw something else, a spark in Ezekiel's eyes, a tension in the shoulders of the young men who had nothing left to lose. She saw recognition dawning on faces that had always known the plantation was evil but had never seen evil take such a concrete form. Her evil. The master's evil. All of it bound together, indistinguishable. Take her to the barn, Josiah commanded. Chain her up. And someone fetch the doctor. I want him to examine all these claims before we execute her. I want documentation for the courts, in case there are questions. They dragged Delphine across the yard, past the 17 graves under the willow tree, past the kitchen house where Hester had tried to warn her. They chained her to a post in the barn, iron shackles cutting into her wrists and ankles, and left her there in the darkness with the horses and the smell of hay and manure. She should have been terrified. Should have been praying, weeping, begging for mercy. Instead, she felt a strange peace settling over her. This was the ending Abney had predicted. This was the moment when the spark would become fire. Through the barn walls, she could hear voices rising in the quarters. Angry voices. Frightened voices. And underneath it all, a different sound, the sound of people beginning to whisper about uprising, about resistance, about how 17 dead babies were nothing compared to the hundreds of souls broken and destroyed by this plantation every year. Ezekiel appeared in the barn door just as the first light of dawn began to gray the sky. He moved quickly, checking to make sure no one had followed him. They're going to burn you at sunrise, he said quietly. I know. We can't let that happen. His eyes were bright with something Delphine had never seen before, determination bordering on madness. You understand what you've done. You've shown everyone that the masters can be defied. That their rules can be broken. That their children aren't untouchable. I didn't mean to start anything, Delphine said. I just wanted to save them. Maybe you did save them. Maybe you saved us all. Ezekiel gripped the chains holding her, testing their strength. Tonight, when they try to burn you, we're going to burn them instead. The main house. The overseer quarters. Everything. This plantation ends tonight, Delphine. The Vexley plantation dies, and something new is born from the ashes. That's not freedom, Delphine whispered. That's just more death. Sometimes death is the only path to freedom. Ezekiel's voice was fierce. You taught us that. 17 times, you taught us that. He turned and disappeared into the growing dawn, leaving Delphine alone with her chains and the knowledge that her terrible mercy had planted seeds of rebellion in soil watered with blood and grief. The Vexley revolt was coming. And Delphine, the angel of death, would be its unwilling prophet. The day crawled toward evening with agonizing slowness. Delphine hung in her chains, drifting between consciousness and fevered dreams where her son's face finally became clear, except it wore the features of all 17 babies she had sent back across the water, a shifting composite of the dead and the never-known. Twice, overseers came to beat her. Once, Mrs. Temperance Vexley herself appeared in the barn doorway, her pale face twisted with grief and fury, spitting accusations about her 4 dead sons. You took them from me, she shrieked. You took my boys before I could even name them properly. Delphine said nothing. There was nothing to say that would translate across the vast chasm between them, the chasm between a woman who owned human beings and a woman who was owned. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, Master Josiah came with Silas and 3 other overseers. They built the pyre in the yard between the barn and the main house, a deliberate choice, visible from both the quarters and the big house windows. A lesson. A warning. A public execution designed to terrorize the enslaved population into continued submission. They stacked the wood high, cypress logs and pine branches, hay and corn stalks. The pyre reached 8 feet tall by the time they finished, a monument to their rage and their power. Bring her out, Josiah commanded as the sun touched the horizon. Silas and another overseer entered the barn, unlocking her chains from the post but leaving the shackles on her wrists and ankles. They dragged Delphine outside, her legs barely able to support her weight. The gathered crowd parted to let them through, perhaps 70 enslaved people forced to watch, their faces carefully blank, their bodies rigid with suppressed emotion. But Delphine saw the truth beneath the masks. She saw Ezekiel standing near the back, his jaw clenched, his hands in fists. She saw 3 young men beside him, Marcus, Abel, and Solomon, all of them field workers with scars on their backs and fury in their eyes. She saw women clutching children, protecting them from the sight even as they were forced to witness. And she saw Hester, standing at the front, tears running down her weathered face, her lips moving in silent prayer. They chained Delphine to a post driven into the center of the pyre, the wood piled around her legs up to her knees. The smoke smell was already thick in the air, mixing with the sweet rot of magnolias and the copper tang that seemed to permanently stain the plantation. "Delphine," Josiah announced, his voice carrying across the yard, "you have been found guilty of 17 counts of murder. Murder of enslaved property. Murder of white children. You have confessed to poisoning infants under your care, to using African witchcraft and devilry to steal innocent lives." "I gave them mercy," Delphine said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Something you wouldn't know about." The blow came from Silas, his fist connecting with her jaw, snapping her head back. Blood filled her mouth. "You will not speak," Josiah continued. "You have no right to speak. You are property, and property that destroys other property must be destroyed in turn. Let this be a lesson to all who would defy the natural order. Let this be a warning against rebellion, against resistance, against the belief that slaves have any power in this world." He gestured to Silas, who produced a torch, its flames dancing in the growing darkness. The sun had nearly set now, the sky gone purple and gold, the first stars beginning to emerge. Silas approached the pyre with the torch held high, his face illuminated by its light, his expression ecstatic with the anticipation of violence. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice shouted, "No!" Everything seemed to happen at once. Ezekiel lunged forward, a blade flashing in his hand, where had he gotten a blade, and drove it into Silas's back. The overseer crumpled, the torch falling from his fingers into the pyre. The dry wood caught immediately, flames racing up the kindling. But Ezekiel was already moving, grabbing the fallen torch, turning toward the main house. "Now," he roared. "Freedom now or death now. Choose." The crowd erupted. Some fled toward the quarters, grabbing their children, seeking shelter. But others, 15, then 20, then 30, surged forward. Marcus and Abel rushed the other overseers, their work-hardened hands becoming weapons. Solomon ran for the main house with Ezekiel, both of them carrying fire. Gunshots cracked through the chaos. One of the overseers had drawn his pistol, and a woman named Dinah fell, clutching her shoulder. But then Marcus was on the overseer, beating him with a length of chain, and the gun went spinning across the dirt. Delphine felt the heat of the flames growing around her legs, and felt the first kiss of fire on her skin. She pulled against her chains, but they held fast. The smoke was already choking her, burning her lungs. Through the chaos, she saw Hester running toward her, saw the old woman grab a fallen axe and begin hacking at the post. "Hold on, child," Hester gasped. "Hold on." The main house was burning now. Ezekiel and Solomon had thrown their torches through the windows, and the expensive curtains had caught like paper. Orange light blazed from the windows as the Vexley family screamed inside, scrambling for the exits. Master Josiah emerged from the front door, his nightshirt smoking, his face blackened with soot. He carried a rifle, and he was looking for targets. His wife stumbled out behind him, clutching their infant daughter, the 18th child, the one Delphine had failed to free. The axe finally bit through the post. Delphine fell forward into Hester's arms, her legs burned but still functional. Hester pulled her away from the pyre, into the shadows near the barn. "Can you walk?" "I can run," Delphine said, though her body screamed in protest. All around them, the plantation was descending into hell. The overseer quarters were burning now too. The cotton gin had caught fire. Flames rose into the night sky like prayers or curses, turning the darkness into flickering chaos. Enslaved people poured from the quarters now, some joining the revolt, others fleeing for the swamp with whatever they could carry. Children cried. Women screamed. Men roared with rage and terror and the ecstatic freedom of finally fighting back. Josiah fired his rifle, and Abel fell, blood blooming across his chest. But then Ezekiel was there, tackling the master to the ground, his blade finding Josiah's throat. The plantation owner's blood spilled onto the red Carolina clay, mixing with the blood of everyone he had ever owned, ever broken, ever destroyed. Temperance Vexley ran for the tree line, still clutching her infant, 3 of her daughters trailing behind her. They disappeared into the darkness, toward the neighboring plantation where they might find help. But help was 2 hours away at best. And the night was just beginning. Marcus pulled Delphine to her feet. "Can you make it to the swamp?" "Yes." "Then go. We'll hold them here as long as we can. Give everyone time to escape." "What about you?" His smile was terrible and beautiful. "I'm done running. I'm done being property. Tonight, I'm a free man, even if it's just for an hour." Gunshots continued to crack through the night. The patrollers from the neighboring properties would be coming soon, alerted by the smoke and flames. They would come with dogs and rifles and the full weight of white supremacy behind them. But for now, for this moment, the Vexley plantation belonged to those who had bled for it. Delphine stumbled through the chaos, Hester supporting her, heading for the eastern edge where the swamp began. Behind them, the flames rose higher, turning the night into day, consuming 3 generations of wealth built on stolen labor and broken bodies. They passed the weeping willow, past the 17 graves that had been the seeds of this conflagration. Delphine paused there, just for a moment, her burned legs trembling. "I freed you," she whispered to the dead. "And you freed us all." "Come on," Hester urged. "We have to keep moving." They plunged into the swamp, into the darkness where the fires couldn't reach, where the Spanish moss hung like curtains between worlds. Behind them, the screaming continued. The gunshots. The crackle of flames devouring everything. Delphine looked back once. The main house was fully engulfed now, a beacon of destruction visible for miles. And in the firelight, she could see figures moving, some fighting, some fleeing, all of them choosing their own paths in this moment when the established order had finally, violently collapsed. 23 enslaved people had joined the revolt. How many would survive until morning? How many would make it to the swamp, to the maroon communities that offered sanctuary in the Great Dismal? How many would die tonight, buying freedom with their blood? Delphine didn't know. Couldn't know. All she could do was keep moving forward, into the black water, into the wild places where human law did not reach. Behind her, the Vexley plantation burned. And with it, 17 ghosts danced in the flames, finally free, finally avenged, finally at peace. Or perhaps not peace. Perhaps just the satisfaction of seeing their deaths mean something, become something larger than themselves. The spark had become a wildfire. And the South would remember the Vexley revolt for generations to come, though the true story, the story of the nurse who sent babies flying back to Guinea, would be lost to time. Buried. Forgotten. Transformed into legend. But Delphine would remember. For whatever time remained to her, she would remember every face, every name, every small life that passed through her hands. And she would carry that weight into whatever tomorrow brought. Dawn came slowly, reluctantly, as though even the sun hesitated to illuminate what the night had wrought. Delphine sat at the edge of the swamp, her feet in the black water, watching smoke still rise from what had been the Vexley plantation. The fires had burned through the night, consuming the main house down to its brick chimney, reducing the overseer quarters to ash and ember, turning 3 generations of accumulated wealth into ruin. Hester had fallen asleep against a cypress tree, exhausted from their flight. Around them, scattered through the swamp in groups of 2 and 3, other survivors waited for full daylight before deciding whether to push deeper into the Great Dismal or risk the roads leading north. 23 had revolted. Delphine had counted them in her mind through the long night, naming each one like a prayer: Ezekiel, Marcus, Abel, Solomon, Dinah, and 18 others whose courage had transformed victimhood into agency, even if just for one terrible, beautiful night. How many still lived? She didn't know. Couldn't know. The screaming had continued until nearly midnight, when the patrollers from the neighboring plantations had finally arrived with their dogs and rifles. She had heard the gunshots growing more frequent, heard the hounds baying through the darkness, heard the sounds of recapture and retribution. But she had also heard people crashing through the underbrush toward the swamp, heard whispered passwords being passed between those who knew the way and those seeking refuge. Some had made it. Some. The water around her feet was cold despite the approaching summer heat. Delphine looked down at her reflection, fractured by ripples into a dozen broken versions of herself. Her face was bruised, her lips split, her eyes hollowed by exhaustion and something deeper, a fundamental emptiness where her soul used to be. The clay pot of poison still rested in her shift, miraculously unbroken through the chaos. She pulled it out, held it up to the growing light. "One drink," Ebony had said. "One drink and all the pain stops." "Don't," Hester said quietly. The old woman was awake, watching Delphine with red-rimmed eyes. "Don't you dare take the easy way now. Not after what you started." "What I started?" Delphine's laugh was bitter. "I didn't start anything. I just killed babies. 17 babies who should have lived." "Should they have?" Hester moved closer, her joints cracking with age and damp. "Should they have lived to be slaves? To be sold, beaten, bred like animals? Or should they have lived to be masters, to own and destroy others like they were owned and destroyed?" She shook her head. "There ain't no good answer, child. That's what you learned. That's what broke you. And that breaking, it broke something bigger." "The revolt would have happened anyway," Delphine said. "Eventually. People can only endure so much. Maybe. But you were the spark. You showed everyone that the masters ain't untouchable. That their children, the ones they use to continue their evil, can be stopped." Hester paused. "Was it mercy or murder? I don't know. Maybe it was both. Maybe in a world this evil, they're the same thing." Delphine looked at the clay pot again, then threw it into the swamp. It disappeared with barely a splash, sinking into the black water where alligators slept and secrets drowned. "I can't drink it," she whispered. "Can't give myself the mercy I gave them. That would be too easy." "So what are you gonna do?" Delphine didn't answer. She stood, her burned legs protesting, and began walking back toward the plantation. Hester scrambled up, grabbing her arm. "Are you out of your mind? They'll kill you on sight." "I know." "Then why?" "Because there are 17 graves under a willow tree," Delphine said quietly. "And I need to sit with them one last time. Need to tell them what their deaths became. What their freedom cost. Child. Don't follow me, Hester. Take the others deeper into the swamp. Find the maroon settlements. Live. That's the only thing that matters now, living free, even if it's just in the hidden places." Delphine pulled away and walked out of the swamp, back through the boundary between wild and cultivated, back toward the smoking ruins that had been her prison for 33 years. The plantation was a graveyard. Bodies lay scattered across the yard, overseers and enslaved alike, their blood soaking into the red clay. The main house was nothing but a skeleton of blackened timbers and collapsed walls. The birthing house had burned too, taking with it all evidence of Delphine's instruments, her rituals, her terrible mercy. Patrollers moved through the ruins, perhaps a dozen men on horseback, their faces grim with the work of rounding up survivors. They would find most of them, Delphine knew. Most revolts ended this way, in recapture, in execution, in the reassertion of the brutal order that kept the whole system functioning. But not all. Some would make it to the swamp, to the maroon communities, to the underground networks that could spirit them north. Some would survive to tell the story, to pass it down, to plant seeds of resistance in soil watered with the blood of the Vexley Revolt. Delphine walked past a patroller without being noticed, or perhaps he noticed but didn't care. She was just one more enslaved woman, one more piece of property, beneath his concern in this moment when there were still armed rebels to hunt. She found the weeping willow still standing, though its branches were singed on one side from the heat of the fires. The 17 graves lay undisturbed, small mounds of earth marked with stones and crude crosses. Delphine sank down among them, her body finally giving out. She lay on her back, staring up through the willow branches at the morning sky now turning from gray to pale blue. The smell of smoke was everywhere, would probably be everywhere for weeks, the scent of destruction clinging to the land like a curse or a blessing. "I freed you," she whispered in Gullah, her grandmother's language, her mother's language, the language beaten out of most of them but never quite silenced. "Sent you flying back across the water before they could chain you. Was it mercy? Was it murder? I don't know anymore. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe all that matters is you're free and I ain't, and that's how it had to be." She heard footsteps approaching but didn't look up. Didn't care anymore who was coming or what they would do to her. There she is. A voice she didn't recognize. The mad nurse. The one who started all this. Should we take her? Master Josiah's dead. Mrs. Vexley fled to Charleston with her daughters. Ain't nobody left to claim her. So what do we do? A long pause. Then, leave her. She's more of a ghost than a woman now. Let her haunt this place. Maybe that's enough punishment. The footsteps retreated. Delphine lay among the graves as the morning brightened around her, as the sun climbed higher, as the smoke continued to rise from the ruins. She thought about Ezekiel, hoped he had made it to the swamp. Thought about Marcus and his terrible, beautiful smile as he chose freedom over survival. Thought about her son, 7 years old now, somewhere in South Carolina, alive or dead, enslaved or miraculously free, she would never know. Thought about the 18th baby, Temperance Vexley's 5th daughter, the one who had survived Delphine's mercy. Would she grow up haunted by this night? Would she become another woman who owned human beings, or would the destruction of her family's plantation plant different seeds in her soul? Delphine would never know that either. All she knew was that she was tired. So tired her bones felt like they were made of ash, like she might blow away on the next breeze. Tired of being property. Tired of being powerless. Tired of making impossible choices in a world designed to offer only impossible options. She closed her eyes and began to hum, the lullaby her grandmother had taught her, the one she had sung to all 17 babies as she sent them back across the water. The melody was mournful and sweet, speaking of a homeland none of them had ever seen but all of them carried in their blood. "Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya," she sang softly. "Someone's crying, Lord, kumbaya. Someone's dying, Lord, kumbaya. Someone's flying, Lord, kumbaya." Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had ceased to have meaning in this place where past and present collapsed into each other, where the dead and living occupied the same space, where history was being written in blood and fire and the broken bodies of those who had dared to resist. Delphine didn't move. Didn't open her eyes. Just lay among the 17 graves, humming her grandmother's song, becoming part of the earth and ash and memory. Some said she died there, that her body was found days later by scavengers, that she was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere on the property. Others claimed she eventually rose and walked into the swamp, that she found Ebony and became a root woman herself, teaching other broken women the secrets of mercy and murder, the rituals of resistance and revenge. Still others whispered that she never left the plantation at all, that her ghost still haunts the land where the Vexley estate once stood, singing lullabies to dead babies, marking invisible children with ash, forever caught between the mercy she tried to give and the horror she became. The truth, like most truths born in the brutal machinery of enslavement, was lost to time. Buried. Transformed into legend. Simplified into hero or villain when she had been something far more complex, a woman broken by an evil system, who broke in turn, whose breaking became a catalyst for something larger than herself. The Vexley Revolt spread. Within weeks, 3 other plantations in North Carolina experienced uprisings. Within months, the whispers of resistance reached Virginia, Georgia, Alabama. Not all succeeded. Most ended in blood and recapture. But the spark had been lit, and sparks have a way of finding kindling no matter how carefully the powerful try to stamp them out. And somewhere in the ruins, under the weeping willow where 17 babies slept their eternal sleep, Delphine's voice, real or imagined, living or dead, continued to sing its mournful lullaby into the southern air, a reminder that mercy and murder could wear the same face when the world offered no other choices. That sometimes the most human response to inhuman conditions was to become something neither fully human nor wholly monstrous, but suspended in between, a spark waiting to ignite, a ghost refusing to rest, a question that history would never fully answer. Was Delphine the angel of death, or the angel of mercy? The 17 graves offered no reply. They simply existed, marking the place where one woman's unbearable grief transformed into unbearable action, where the breaking point was reached and everything changed. The Vexley Revolt began that night. But what began that night would echo through generations, a reminder carved in ash and blood and the small bones of children who never knew chains. Some called it horror. Some called it justice. Most called it both. And in the end, perhaps that was the truest answer of all. The story of Delphine and the Vexley Revolt ends here, but the questions it raises linger on. In a system built on absolute evil, can there be absolute right? Is mercy ever murder, or murder ever mercy? I want to hear your thoughts. Subscribe and comment below. This story may haunt you, but these questions should challenge us all. What would you have done in Delphine's place? What horror is justified when facing the monstrous?